Hi everyone, today we're going to be talking about public speaking. Now, the first thing you always have to talk about when you talk about public speaking is dealing with anxiety. So we're going to spend a good portion of the lecture today talking about how specifically to deal with anxiety whenever you're speaking in front of a group of people. After that, we'll talk about preparation, and then after we talk about preparation, we'll talk about the actual delivery of a presentation. I hope it's helpful for you. So let's start, like I said, with dealing with anxiety. So, it's important that we learn to have predominantly positive feelings about public speaking. And I like to teach something called the Frozen Principle. So let me explain exactly what all that means. It's not enough simply to tell yourself, okay, don't be afraid of public speaking. Okay, don't be afraid, don't be afraid. If you go into a presentation and you're telling yourself, don't be afraid, don't feel anything, don't be afraid, don't be nervous, if you're doing that, you're going to fail. You're going to feel nervous, you're going to feel upset. You don't want to do that. So, rather, what you want to do is learn to have more positive feelings going into that presentation. And I like to illustrate this principle with, like I said, the Frozen Principle. You may have noticed the image here is from the movie Frozen. For those who haven't seen the movie, it's about a Disney princess who can basically shoot ice out of her hands. She's got ice powers. And so she can shoot ice out of her hands. And the deal is this: whenever she gets really emotional, she'll accidentally shoot ice out of her hands and maybe kill someone. That's actually the plot of the movie, or a big part of the plot of the movie. So she has to control her emotions, or otherwise she might kill someone with an icicle shooting out of her fingers. It's a great movie if you haven't seen it, okay? So she has to learn through the course of the movie, okay, how can I deal with this problem that I have? And so at the beginning of the movie, she's like, okay, don't feel anything, don't be upset, don't be nervous, don't feel anything, and you can keep this ice power under control. Doesn't go well. She ends up going off on her own. But by the end of the movie, she understands, actually, if she has positive emotion, she can control her feelings and can control her ice powers. It's the same thing with public speaking. It's the same thing. You have to go into public speaking thinking positively, having predominantly positive feelings, or at least having more positive feelings than you may have had in the past. It's not enough simply to say, okay, don't have bad feelings. You can't just make yourself a blank. You need to learn to have those positive feelings. But how do you do that? How do you do that? It's not easy, but you can do it. And so that's what we're going to talk about here in the next couple of slides, so to speak, next couple of pieces of paper. So let's start with the physical symptoms associated with anxiety in public speaking. Some people really, really have a problem with feeling tense and feeling uptight, and so I want to talk about that to start. So, physical symptoms. There's a few things that you need to do to help yourself deal with those physical symptoms and have positive feelings in regards to the physical symptoms. First, recognize that they're normal, view them as a thrill, and then use the energy you feel to be dynamic. So, first of all, recognize that they're normal. If you're having an accelerated heart rate and you're maybe some tingling in your lips or fingers, and you may feel a little wobbly on your legs, and maybe there's a tremor in your voice, all those things are totally, totally normal, okay? A lot of people start freaking out because they feel like something bad is happening to them when they start having those sensations. In reality, those are a normal part of public speaking. It's totally okay to feel that way. In fact, I usually feel that way going into a lot of public speaking scenarios. Sometimes I'm going into a public speaking scenario that's got a room full of people, maybe hundreds of people, and I still feel those feelings. The difference is, when I was younger, those feelings freaked me out. I didn't like feeling that way. But now I understand that that's normal. I can understand and tell myself, hey, this is a normal aspect of being in front of a large group of people. It's okay. These feelings are okay. Next, I want to view those feelings as a thrill. You can feel those feelings and say that they're normal and say, oh no, I'm really nervous. Or you can say, hey, I'm feeling excited. In fact, this is what made Bruce Springsteen an outstanding performer. He was really nervous in his early days. If you don't know who Bruce Springsteen is, you need to look him up. He's one of the great rock and roll stars. So he would, in the early days, he would go into concerts and he would think, oh man, I'm so nervous right now. I'm so nervous, and he'd be uptight and it would really bother him. But what he ended up doing was, he started telling himself, I'm not nervous, I'm excited. And he started thinking about those normal feelings differently. He saw them as a thrill, not as nervousness. And so think of them more positively after you recognize that they're normal. And then finally, use the energy that you feel to be dynamic. No one likes to hear a public speaker who's just kind of stock still like this and completely undynamic. There's a huge difference between what I'm doing right now and what I'm doing right now. There's a big difference there. And so you can use this energy that you feel, those nervous things that you feel, and you can pour them into being energetic and moving around in a way that is dynamic. Now, some people don't like those physical symptoms and they bother them, so this is how you think about them positively. Now we need to talk about the social concerns associated with public speaking. The social concerns. So, many people don't want to get in front of an audience and look like a fool. They don't want to get in front of people and really look bad. And so I want you to understand these basic ideas I've got here on this piece of paper to help you deal with those social concerns. First of all, remember it's worse on the inside. Next, remember the risks are low and the rewards are great. Act confident. Don't be too hard on yourself. And then finally, recognize the opportunity to help people with your presentation. So let's work through each of those very briefly. First, remember it's worse on the inside. As you're giving a speech, as you're giving a presentation, you will register the little mistakes that you make. For example, just now as I said the word register and scratch my head, I'm thinking, oh no, I kind of stumbled over that word and I'm scratching. That's what I'm thinking. Most people aren't really registering that, or if they are, they're going to forget it immediately. Already in this video, I've stumbled over my words a few times. I've registered that. Most of you watching probably haven't. Maybe you have because it's a video. It's a little bit of a weird scenario here. But all the same, you kind of register things that are happening in the speech more than your audience does. Your audience primarily is either ignoring you or listening to what you're saying to learn from you. And so remember that. They're not necessarily critiquing you as harshly as you are critiquing yourself. So it's worse on the inside. Next, remember the risks are low and the rewards are great. If you go into a presentation, you kind of bomb it, well, welcome to the human race. We've all done that. That's no big deal if you bomb a presentation. That just means that you're human. Most people aren't great presenters. They're not super dynamic and they're not great when they get in front of people. That's just the way it is. However, if you get in front of a group of people and you do an awesome job, you do an incredible job, people will think really, really highly of you. They will be super impressed with you. So really what we're looking at here is the risk-reward ratio in a presentation. The risks are, well, if you bomb it, that's usually no big deal. It's okay. If you're awesome, that's a really big deal in the professional world. If you're a good public speaker, it's really, really great. So understand that you're going into a low-risk, high-reward scenario whenever you speak. Next, act confident. That is, use confident body language. You may not feel confident, but you can still pretend to be confident with your body language. And some studies have shown that when you act more confidently with your body language, you'll start to feel more confident as well. So act confidently. Next, don't be too hard on yourself. Don't beat yourself up if you bomb a presentation. That happens all the time. Don't beat yourself up if you kind of muddle a point or don't say something exactly correctly. The worst thing you can do is excuse yourself and apologize for every little mistake that you make. If you say something that's obviously wrong, okay, you can go back and say, hey, sorry, I said this incorrectly, let me correct this. But if you just stumble over your words a little bit, you don't want to say, excuse me. I once heard a presentation from a guy, and he said, excuse me, every single time he had a slight hiccup, every time he had a pause, and so it came out as a speech of excuse me's with some content sprinkled in. You don't want to do that. Just keep going forward unless you've made a factual error of some kind, in which case you can apologize and go back and correct it. But little hiccups and things along the way, you don't need to apologize for. It's fine, just keep going and don't get upset about those things. Finally, and I dare say most importantly, recognize the opportunity to help people with your presentation. We often will get up in a presentation and we're thinking about ourselves. How will I look? How will I come across? How will I be perceived? Myself, myself, myself. That's what we're concerned with. We really need to be concerned with our audience. We're in front of a group of people to help them in some way. That's what we need to remember. We're there to help. Whenever you give a presentation, there's a reason for it in the professional world. You're there to explain things, to help people understand things. And so there is a potential benefit for your audience, and you need to be focused on that benefit. Focused on the audience. What are their needs? What are their wants? Think about what they need to hear and understand that you're going into this presentation not simply as an exercise to make yourself look good or look bad, hopefully not, but you're going into this to help people. Whenever you think about helping the people in your audience, you're taking the focus from yourself to the group of people that you're speaking to. This made a big difference for me personally when I became a college lecturer. When I started out in this job, I was super nervous. Super, super nervous. Like, shaking walking into the classrooms. Truly, this is 5 years ago. Lecturing really bothered me. It was something that I felt incredible anxiety about. In my second semester, however, things kind of turned around. And the reason they turned around is because I recognized whenever I'm teaching, it's not about me and looking good and all this stuff. It's about helping students. And that made all the difference for me in my anxiety. Almost in the moment that I had that realization, the anxiety kind of melted away. And I've enjoyed doing the work ever since. So that's the basics of dealing with anxiety. Now let's talk about preparation for a presentation. So here's preparation, things to keep in mind. Know exactly how you will open and close. Make the notes that are appropriate for you, and practice 5 times out loud. These are the basic points for preparation. First of all, it's very important to know how you will open and close. I think it's important in a formal presentation to memorize the opening statement and the closing statement. In a certain scenario, which is very formal in the business world, you don't really want to get up there and say, okay, well, yeah, so let's get going here. That's not great. If you're starting a lecture in an informal setting, that's okay, no big deal. If you're starting a meeting, that's okay. But if you're starting a formal presentation, you want to gather everybody's attention. You want to have a good opening sentence that you state. That comes across confident, and it helps to make sure that you gather everybody's attention. Same thing with the closing. All too often in professional contexts and listening to students in the classroom, I will hear this ending to a presentation. Well, that's it. I'm done. That's not a great presentation. That, in fact, is a poor presentation. That's not a great ending to a presentation. That is a poor ending to a presentation. You need to avoid doing that. Have a good closing speech that leaves your audience with a good impression. Have that prepared, have it memorized, know exactly how you're open, and exactly how you're going to close as you prepare. Next, make notes that are appropriate for you. What notes help you when you speak? You got to try this out a lot of different ways. You got to try writing your notes out, like sentence by sentence. I've done that many times. In certain formal settings, I think that's best, where I've got the entire presentation written out. I can just go through it and read it if necessary. If like I lose my spot or something like that, I can look down and read a sentence and kind of get myself back on track. In certain extremely formal circumstances, you actually will just read your speech. You won't actually give it extemporaneously like I'm giving this one or like I give my lectures. But sometimes you want your notes written out. Sometimes you just need an outline. Whatever's best for you. You know what's best for you. You don't want to be reading extemporaneous speeches, but only the formal speeches you'll want to, really read. But so just evaluate your own situation and your own needs and make notes that are best for you. Now, one key tip here, one pro tip that I give you about making notes. I think it's best whenever you are making your notes, if you're going to have a podium, you can make your notes on paper or you can do it however you want. If you're going to not have a podium, that is, if you're just going to be standing out in front of a group of people like I am right now, I'm standing in front of one person, thank you to my lovely wife for recording this. If you're just going to be standing out in front of a group of people, I don't think it's super nice to have like paper in front of you, like you're holding a sheet of paper. I think that's kind of sloppy looking, and I don't think that's super helpful. So I think in those circumstances, if you're not going to have a podium and you're going to be standing in front of people and you do need notes, it's best to use note cards in that situation. Finally, practice out loud 5 times. Or as many times as you need to make sure that you know this thing inside and out and you're confident. 5 times is my magic number. Your magic number may be something different. The best thing I can tell you when it comes to preparing to give a presentation to help deal with anxiety and to make sure that it's good is that you should run through it out loud several times. Don't restart if you mess something up. Just keep going and act like you're actually in front of the group of people and do this thing out loud. It's really important to be saying these words out loud several times so that you're very confident with them and you know them going into your presentation. Even if I'm going to give a long formal presentation, I will still practice it 5 or more times. Sometimes I'm speaking for 40, 45 minutes, and that means, yes, I'm spending several hours of my preparation simply saying this out loud so that I'm more comfortable with it when I go in front of a group of people. We all understand that practice is something that's vitally important if we want to become skilled in any activity. You know that practice is important if you want to be a great athlete. Practice is important if you want to get better as a writer, as a reader, studying, taking tests, all these things that you do as a college student. You get better at your job as you go along because you're practicing all the time. You understand that principle. You must put that principle into practice whenever you're preparing presentations. A lot of P's in that sentence, very alliterative, but it's a good point. So you want to put that into practice. You want to be practicing for your presentations many, many times out loud. It will help you. So start doing that if you're not doing it already. Okay, final point here for our presentation, our public speaking lecture, is about giving the speech. First thing, dress nicely. Next, be aware of your bodily movements. Next, don't stare at notes or the computer screen. And finally, be controlled but lively. Got a picture here of Jerry Seinfeld, who is an outstanding stand-up comedian. We watched a clip from Seinfeld in lecture earlier in the semester. Whenever he does stand-up, I think he's a perfect example of the things that I'm talking about here. So I gave a picture of him just to illustrate these points. First of all, dress nicely. The social science shows again and again, people are responsive and persuaded more by people who are dressed nicely. That's just the way it is. It's not necessarily the way that it should be, but people who dress nicely are often more persuasive and people respect them more. So you want to dress nicely. In general, you want to dress about a notch above what your audience is going to be dressed as. And so you want to dress just a little bit better than the audience you expect. But it's really important. It's a vitally important thing. Dress nicely when you present. Next, be aware of your bodily movements. Are you someone that kind of has weird fidgets whenever you speak? When you practice, you'll probably discover some of those weird fidgetings that you have. Anyway, be aware of those things. Be aware of teachers who are telling you that you have those things. Let me give you just a couple of quick examples of the types of fidgets that I'm talking about. All right. You've got some weird ones where people will kind of play around in their pockets like this, and they'll kind of lean forward and do this kind of thing. So that's a fidget that you want to avoid. One that I see very frequently in the lecture halls whenever students are presenting is this one. It's really unusual, actually. It's tapping the front of the foot with your heel. If you can't get it on camera, it's okay. But it's like going back and forth and doing this. So there's a lot of that going on. I see a lot of that very frequently. So these are the types of things I want you to be aware of. Do you move in any awkward ways? Do you have a tendency to want to move in certain awkward ways? Be aware of those things and then control those body movements. You don't want to be moving around super awkwardly when you're in front of an audience because it's distracting and also it kind of puts out an air of uncertainty. You don't want your audience to think that you are uncertain about the things that you're presenting. So, final point here. Oh no, 2 more points, I beg your pardon. Did I just apologize for something that was a minor mistake? I did, don't do that usually. Okay, don't stare at the notes or the computer screen. Okay, whenever you are giving the presentation and you've got a computer screen right here in front of you, almost all amateur public speakers want to look at the screen and not look at the audience. You all know this is true, it's absolutely hypnotizing. You want to sit here and you just want to talk to the screen. It's much more comfortable to do that. It's much less open. It's much less vulnerable if you just look at the screen. But here's the deal. Standing here and looking at a screen while your audience is watching you right there is not dynamic. It's not interesting. And it does, again, show that some of that uncertainty that we want to avoid. There's a huge difference between giving your speech like this and giving your speech like this. And so you want to avoid staring at a computer screen, especially. They're absolutely hypnotizing. You don't want to stare at the computer screen. You also don't want to stare at your notes. You want to be engaged with your audience, looking at your audience as much as you possibly can. Make that eye contact. Make that connection with your audience. It really matters. Finally, be controlled but lively. There's 2 extremes in public speaking. One extreme is people who are so controlled that they're monotonous. And so these are the people who are giving a presentation like this. They're giving a presentation like this. They may say interesting things, but there's very little vocalic movement. In other words, their voice is very regular. There's not much movement in their body. It just doesn't do much for an audience. All right? There's another form as well. All right? The camera's getting ready because I think you know what I'm about to. There's the other person who's like bouncing off like, hey guys, what's going on? What's up? Like there's that kind of stuff as well. Now that's not doing anything for you either, okay? You can go too far with your liveliness. You can be too lively in your presentation, all right? Now, most people tend towards the first form of public speaking that I mentioned, the kind of monotonous, simple, straightforward thing. Most people tend a little bit more towards that, especially when they're unfamiliar with public speaking. But it's also a problem to be way too lively. So be controlled, that is, control your bodily movements, understand how you're moving, but also be lively. Use your voice, use your hands, use your gestures, and move your bodily movement a little bit. Normally in the classroom, as you all know, I like to walk around a little bit in front of the class. I like to go around a little bit, and that's just, keeping everybody watching and keeping everybody engaged. In this case, of course, I'm not walking around very much. I'm trying to make life easy on my, again, very lovely camera person, Stephanie Albritton. Shout out. So I'm like Jimmy Fallon right now. I just realized that. Jimmy Fallon's wife is making his video. So anyway, not nearly as funny or as rich, but there's at least that analogy there. So anyway, we want to be controlled but lively. That is lively, moving your hands, moving around a little bit, moving around with your voice as well, having some facial expressions that are appropriate, but also controlled. You don't want to be bouncing off the walls. So that's the basics for public speaking. Now, let me give just a quick moment to explain what I'm expecting in your assignment. Of course, there'll be a full assignment description on Blackboard, but what I'm expecting in the assignment is simply this. I'm going to ask you to give notes from this presentation. That is, write down the basic points of the presentation and hand those in, and then below the notes, I want you to give me just a quick paragraph where you say something that you've learned or a couple things that you've learned here in this lecture today, and you explain how you plan to put that into action in your own life. That is, how do you plan to apply what you've learned here in this lecture to your life in the future, all right? Hope everybody's doing well.